Again, thanks for coming and joining us here on It's in the Signs. As you can see, we're in Europe, as we are these days, and we're going to visit a town on the south of the Baltic Ocean, on the north of Poland, a little town called Gdansk, and primarily one of its main forts on the outskirts of town, protecting the waterway into the port. Before we quite go there, I'm going to just say I love Gdansk. It's so many layers of history, and this particular fort, the Wisloujscie, you'll excuse me, my Polish is terrible. The Wisłoujście fort here on the edge has been guarding the port since the 1300s or so, when originally it was a lighthouse built by the Templar Knights and remained an important landmark and fortification up through the 1890s or so, as we're going to see on some of these maps here. So beginning in 1674, the map shows up and shows how the central fort and the bastions on both sides of the river protected the river mouth. And then through 1703, those were generally upgraded and outsized. You can see the outer bastions and walls up through 1750, where you can see how it goes even further. And interestingly, the river went straight out to the sea from there. And here in the 1879 map, where the fort starts to lose its usefulness, you also can see the river was blocked off, both through natural sedimentation and landscaping. I guess you can call it that. The fort was used up until the 50s, including as a storage area for a local factory where they saved fruit product, as fate would have it. But today, the fort is preserved. The central area, as you can see here, is a major park and really cool area. They continue to upgrade it, and you can visit almost every part of it today. And you can also see it from the water. And so on the left here is really one of those inner bastions, not part of the same fort. And you can see from this image how it would have looked back in the 1300s from that image depicting the Teutonic Knights setup. Again, another image showing from the other side of the river both sets of bastions and the fortification blocking off the river. Here is a major battle between the Swedes. You can see in the lower corner there the fort and the waterway. And that is a connection between Sweden and Poland, because that's really why the Vasa was built, if you're familiar with that famous ship up in Sweden. Along the way, of course, we can see these multiple pictures of how the fort looked over time and its importance along the waterway. From here, rescue ships were set out and into the Baltic to get people, but also to police the waterway and make sure things remained kosher, so to speak. Also, the watchtower, the lighthouse, had many different views and toppings, and right now they're working on restoring the 1879 version, I believe, which is something like this one that you can see here with a conical top and a clock. So we'll see how that progresses over time. And in the meantime, you can get a sense of how this has changed over time from this image from, I believe, the 20s, where you can see the brickworks on the side of the river, and you can see how these bastions reach from that point way over there on the left, and they're going to stretch all the way past this wooded area, which is actually still part of the fort. It's really a couple of kilometers, this whole entire length. And once again, these are really just the inner bastions. They don't preserve the later 1879 and so forth outer bastions entirely. But you can walk on almost all of these points, and you can see some of the brickworks and the underground works. And there's the drawbridge. So let's go take a look inside. Okay, so here we are in the heart of the fort, and this is called the Wreath, what we're looking at. Specifically, between the houses and the lighthouse, you can see the rooftop there of what is called the Wreath. These houses we'll go into later and talk about them more. And what we're really going to talk about and go see is the Wreath and the lighthouse. So as we walk around the center of the fort, just to place things in history, originally these houses were not there. As you can see in this image, it was just the lighthouse with the walled embankment, and that was built to take advantage of higher ground for use of artillery. Before that, it had been just a brick lighthouse, and archers and so forth were plenty good. But with the advance of firepower, it was felt these kinds of brickworks and 360-degree arc of fire were important. And as you can see also from that image, there's not any outer walls really. There are some mounds low to the ground, but by and large, this was just considered sufficient. However, the wreath itself dates back to around the 1570s, when the city fathers, so to speak, implored the king to allow them to build this fortification and improve its not only defense of the river, but defense of itself. And so, as we can see, the wreath allows for, as I said, that 360-degree arc of fire. And here we are inside. When the tower was originally built, it was just wood, but that got burned down early in its life, and the Teutonic Knights replaced it with brick. At the time the wreath was built, that height was increased by another 10 meters. And what I really enjoyed walking around in here is you can see the various kinds of vaults and arches and other works that were in the wreath and have been repurposed, as you can see here immediately. The big arches across the top that would have led into a vault, so to speak, and then were filled in later for windows and doors, and now sort of even heavy doors and armored sections, so to speak, because again, this was used all the way up until the 1870s. So as technology improved and metalworking improved and all the rest, so did the fort. Right now, though, we're going to go on up inside. As we go up, we're going to also talk about history, going sort of from the earliest part, as we talk about it, going up the stairs, up to the later part, and connecting it even to the modern day. So we should start by saying that what is today Poland started out way back in the day as an area called Old Prussia for the Prussian people who lived here, and that they actually recorded having a watchtower here in the 800s up to the 1000s. And then the Teutonic Knights came and sort of formed their rule over the area, establishing the Malbrock Castle south of Gdansk here. But they also record building a watchtower here in the 12 and 1300s. That watchtower, as I mentioned, got burned down in 1372 during a raid by the Hussite Suraci. I believe that's how you pronounce that. And then they rebuilt the tower, which had been of wood, as I mentioned, with a brick tower. And it's important to note that, during this time, Gdansk was already a very important port, and the lighthouse here that had a fire atop it, that's the kind of light it used, is recorded on maps going back to like 1539. You can see on the web article, there's a beautiful map that has just a tower with a fire on top of it. And guess what? That's this position, that's this site. The location was also where the knights managed the throughway, the waterway, and collected taxes and entry ports, and also mounted rescue missions for crashed ships in their area and so on. But what we're really seeing here is that in the 1500s to 1600s, basically the Kingdom of Poland was starting to be established, and the king allowed the wreath to be built, and for the tower to be upgraded, and for further bastions to be built. And as we mentioned, in the 1560s and 70s, the town fathers asked that it be protected with the wreath, and then later all the bastions. And an important part of that is, or motivation of that, was the attacks by the Swedes and the feud between the cousins, who were both Vasas, one being the king of Sweden and one being the king of Poland. More about that later. But as we reach out here, we'll connect everything to modern life. So below us, you can see the bastions, and right out there is where Westerplatte is, and that's where World War II began. And as I mentioned earlier, the waterway used to go straight from the port, which is down that away. And this area here was where ships would be docked, and river masters would be put on board so that they could steer the ships into the port back in the day. And this whole area that looks wooded below us is part of the fort. But going back over to that area, the river used to go straight out into the sea, and it obviously does not anymore. And so all of these areas all of this here, in and out, around the way, is part of the fort. And we're going to take a look at that later and even do a speed run, so stay tuned. We've made our way back down, obviously, from the lighthouse back into the Reeth, and before we go back out to the fort, we're going to walk around the upper section here of the Reeth and take a look at the firing positions that became so important as artillery improved. So as you can see from the image, the windows were interlocking, that is to say they were overlapping, and so therefore created a complete 360-degree arc of fire. Here on the second floor, this was especially preserved because from here, with improved gunnery, one could also fire over the inner bastion walls, later known as Fort Carre, for square in French. And so those green mounds that you can see right there immediately without trees on them is the inner bastion, part of that fort square or Fort Carre. And all along here, between each of these windows where the pillars are below us on a floor, would also have been artillery positions. Those are now all covered over by the housing, which we noticed earlier and which we're going to go visit in just a little while. But meantime, let's take a look at what this means to have this 360-degree arc of fire and what it meant to protecting the river. So here is the river. Out there is where the water would have been, the waterway would have been, and Westerplatte. So that's the modern connection. And then just a few windows over, we can look that far south. So you can count between here, there's, roughly 3 or 4 or 5 of these positions, each with a cannon position that could have been swiveled. As you can see, the loopholes here are made for that. And you can also see that down below, if someone was trying to storm your castle from the water, at each of the points, the bastion provided an inner field of fire, which prevented anyone from sort of scaling the walls easily while protecting all of the defenders. For many of you, I'm sure this is old hat, but there it is. And meanwhile, let's crane our necks up and just look at how tall this tower is right in the middle of the whole fort. Moving right along though, let's see how these things were used in everyday life. So we can tell from inside this one that it was the kitchen. And how do we know that? Well, in looking around, this vestibule was a stove. That's right, this brickwork contained a fire, and you can tell because the brickwork has a hole in it. That's a chimney, all the way up through the top. Although we may or may not be able to find those things on the outside today because it's not in use, so who knows. It's part of the preservation, but you don't have to preserve everything because it's now not in use. I think it's interesting to keep in mind as we now go from the inner portion where we just were looking, connected to the outer portion and connecting it all to everyday life. It's important to keep in mind that everyday people lived everyday lives at this everyday fort, protecting their port every day. And so while considering how this platform would have contained cannons and mortars and artillery and soldiers, and keeping in mind that this is the waterway out to the sea, out that direction, which of course that's also Westerplatte, once again for orientation, and how these areas just below us, that cement beam, would have been protection in crossfire, the lighthouse kept an overwatch. Well, all of these things were all actually used and by people, and so you had to have things like chimneys. This is where we were just a moment ago below, and as you can see, there aren't any chimneys here. So they're just covered over, I suppose. This is the doorway we just came through, but as we come around, you can see some of these other vaults below us also have chimneys. So we can suppose that they were either for keeping warm or for having a kitchen. Speaking of everyday life, here's a battle pram. Certainly part of the ancient armaments for carrying children around. Right? No way. Anyway, what we're going to do now is go into some of the housing that has been around the Reeth, and this particular portion has been super well reconstructed. It's really cool. You can see a bunch of period accoutrements, so to speak. I'm sure this is not how they would have been arranged. I can't imagine they kept just muskets and whatnot sitting around. Must have been hard to upkeep. And as we turn around here, we'll also see that there's sort of a kitchen and eating area. And you can see here, this is one of the lower windows for the Reeth. So it was just incorporated into the living quarters. Here is a sleeping and working area, obviously a seaman's chest, so to speak, a writing area. All of these sorts of materials would have been somewhat suitable for the period, I'm sure. and we can get a sense of everyday life, which I think is pretty cool. We mentioned earlier the conflicts between sort of Poland and Sweden, and you can see here how important Sweden must have been to them, as it's a sizable portion of the map. And this is then named after somebody from 1628. Perhaps they lived here, I don't know. Having said that, we're going to continue onward and see some other portions of the fort, getting a little bit away from the everyday life for a moment and going back to the arms and armament, because after all, this was a fort, and here right outside is an excellent connection of cannons. From this position, you can see all the cool parts of the cannon. So one of these loaders really needed a lot of work to fire, and so it wasn't very quick. There's the fuse, where you would have held your fire to actually do the firing. Does anyone know what the thing on the right is? It's a sponge. That's right. You would wet it, and before you primed things with these other ends, like that shovel where you poured the powder in, you had to clean out any embers from the last firing. So each of the stages needed to load and fire this cannon are all represented right here on this excellent exhibition, which I just think is pretty cool. It's not every day that you find out that sort of thing. And so this fort, again, is just such an excellent exhibition of all of that. We're going to turn now to the enlisted men's quarters as we begin to head towards the outer portions of the fort. Obviously, they're a little bit more closely packed and dense, and that's just the way of things, I suppose. You can also see that they're 2 stories, and they're not really set up, obviously, for artillery installations and whatnot. However, I can't help but wonder if they didn't make use of it as a redoubt, should they need to. A redoubt, of course, is those things outside of the main fortifications where soldiers can retreat and do their last defense. A redoubt is that within the castle or fortification walls. So from this position, they obviously would have had line of fire over the entire courtyard and been squeezing enemies between the wreath, the housing, the officers' housing, and their own enlisted men's positions, should the main gate be stormed. Who knows? I'm not an expert in that sort of thing, and whether it was actually used that way or this is just my hypothesis, then there it is. Inside, though, we can see, again, that they're quite small and cramped, although I bet at the time they would have been considered reasonable. The chimney there in the corner would have been used for warmth. We are in northern Poland and southern Baltic Sea, so that is important. You can see each of these vaults have that sort of thing. And in some of them you can see larger hearths, which would have been kitchens and food making preparations. I believe this one here, for example, may have been just given the size of the chimney that we can see. And this one goes up towards the back, which is interesting because we already saw the ones that are on the front. And so these upper ones had chimneys that go to the back of the building, and the lower ones seem to have had chimneys that come to the front of the buildings, which again you can see moments ago. As we look outside, it's not only just beautiful, it's an amazing sight, but you can also again see that sort of line of fire should it be necessary. Across the courtyard from the enlisted men's quarters is another wonderfully reconstructed portion of the site, and this one is a rather large kitchen. I'm not sure what this means and how it works in the greater scheme of things or what period this is meant to be, but it is set up to, it seems to me, illustrate a larger portion of people. So maybe this was enlisted men's kitchen and mess, I'm not sure. In any case, here is a pantry which would have kept food items and, as you can see, some crockery and cleanup things. And then we get into the main portion of the kitchen, and you can get a better idea of that brickwork that I was pointing out earlier that makes up the hearth. And around it, all of the cooking materials that one would have needed to feed people. You can see the size of this chimney, and then it's similar to the one in the enlisted men quarters, so that's why I said that. But there's all sorts of things around here which I think are very cool, and I just wonder at their main use. For example, you saw the tub. So did people use that for bathing and get hot water and so on? I don't really know. But in any case, it is a beautiful reconstruction, and I just love considering how everyday people use this in an everyday way as they tried to live their, as I've said many times, everyday life. But for now, we're going to use that and go forward and also go check out the outer portions of the fort. So join me out there, won't you? Let's take a look. So the innermost of the outermost parts are one of these four corners. So that door that I was just pointing to leads to one of the bastions. In fact, this one in the corner, as you can see from the map. So when you were manning the bastions, you would have walked through an under tunnel and gone out to the other side. Interestingly, I did find one of them open where there reconstruction work going on, and I snuck a little bit in, but they would not let me go in fully. So I have just a picture for that, as you'll see it in a moment. But the main point being, as you walk up here on the top of this bastion, there was a tunnel underneath it, and that allowed you to safely go out to each of the corners and protect the main walls from being stormed. So from a safe position just below us here, you could fire all around. So right down there and right over to there, and there were people over there firing back the other way. That causeway is the main gate to the fort. And of course, there's these locations on each of the four corners. So that's why it's called, again, Fort Carre, or Carre, in any case, French for square. So now we're going to jump outside of Fort Carre, the main portion of the fort, and immediately you can see how the reconstruction is not nearly as well done. And that's okay, as this beautiful parkland is still a symbol of the fort. I still love it. In fact, I dig how the layers of history are just laying out before us. This path along the way here is straight out from the gate, more or less, as you can see from the aerial photography in the map, how we're sort of walking around those outer bastions. The river is to my back, so the map or the aerial photography might be a little confusing. But as it is, just walking around this site, you can see the nature of these 1870s buildings. As we'll see from time to time, many of the details are still there. Giant iron hooks for the giant iron doors that would have been there, and the keystones that mark them as 1870s. As for today, as you can see, they're kind of hangout spots and graffiti central, but what are you going to do? If you own the land and it's your history, who's going to say you're wrong? I don't think it's me. In any case, as far as militarily, as we walk across here, the various mounds you see before you had various purposes. They're all reinforced with brick interiors, and the roundish ones were, to my knowledge, built to hold the gunpowder and so forth. But these square ones, in the midst of this music venue, as you can see, there's a stage and these bleachers, and just to the left as we're passing it, and you can see in the rear view there, a sound booth, at least to my mind. Behind all of this is this brick, what I think is office or organizational center for the main portion of the bastion that we're standing on. And I say that because it's not big enough to have been a living quarters, and there's not really any of the other kinds of things like hearths and stuff built into it. Instead, I believe this would have been used to store the muskets, the sabers, limited amounts of gunpowder, because as I said, those would have been kept in the reinforced mounds, should they blow up, then they don't hurt everyone. And this would have been for organizational purposes, where the orders were drawn up, given, enemy movements tracked, etc., etc., etc. But I just find it interesting that on top of all of it, there's a music venue. Why not? And so we're going to walk around here towards one of the points of the bastion, again taking a closer look at some of these, what I think of as ammo dumps, where the gunpowder would have been kept, and see their various states of, well, dare I say, decrepitude. It's still a beautiful park. One can see how nature is taking over the site. None of these trees would have been here back in the day. It would have been, more graded, that is to say, a smooth slope, so you could move your material and men around the place more easily, to a steeper berm where it would have been harder for your enemies to get up and over, providing you cover fire. But all of that is softened now. Here you can see is a 1871 keystone, highlighting what I was talking about, as well as the iron details. I just love that. And one can tell that this was sort of a defensive consideration, because there's the loopholes. They would have been pointing out into the courtyard, providing fire and cover should things be covered. These areas I'm pointing to really are just the backsides of where we just came from. And you can see how these are all over in the landscape. But what we're going to look at now is, well, another music venue. As you can see, these are just spotted all over. I'm not sure when or how they were used, but somebody put some effort into them. But this particular mound is near the point of one of the bastions. And first of all, I just, as always, love the details. Even though you can't read the keystone, the iron latches still there. I just think that's so cool. But from the inside, you can see this one also has loopholes. It was pointing at the one we were looking at before. As we walk around, we can see how that was just, or how that is totally softened. And the ground has now covered all of these loopholes, so its defensive nature is sort of lost when you're looking at it from the outside. Obviously, all that ground, as I've said before, would have been cleared away to the base of the brickwork, giving you better defensive and offensive capabilities. Interestingly, though, as we climb up this little mound, we can see one of the last remaining outer bastions, one of these triangles, as you can see on the map. The area with trees on the other side of this grass is that said bastion. The grass in between there is the moat. So you will not get over there today without getting your feet wet, although it is much more marshy and terrible. So the whole point was to be out on that bastion and have this moat that I just pointed out be your part of your defenses, right? Your enemies would have had to float or swim over there, making it very difficult. But now we're going to jump to the outer corner of the fort, and where we were just pointing is where the lighthouse is. You can see it as that white tower. And you can see the general shape of the bastion, but this area is just not well kept at all. The trees are giant, so it has been the least kept for the longest period of time. And yet these ruins are still here. I find it interesting that these ones on this end of the fort are kind of different. So for example, this one has windows. It does not seem to have loopholes to the side, but again, just these windows. And the modern use as a sort of trash dump just sort of gives away the game for how well this area has been worked on. I'm not sure why all the bricks are there. Obviously some have fallen down from there, but can't be that many because look how many are still in the vault. Around this whole period though, or portion, I should say, you can still get the sense of the bastion. We're walking now through the lower portion that would have been, again, that graded area that let people move from area to area under cover. And we're going now to what I think might be a redoubt for this period, because they have this very small access port that we saw here and a very narrowed entry that we're going to creep up over here on. And I don't know about you, but I kind of think of the Jungle Books as I'm coming up here, because the trees are growing over it just mightily. I think that is so cool. Anyway, very narrow fear of the fire, very narrow entry. This cement block, though, and the narrow hallways leading in here that you can see sort of confuse me. I wonder how old they are. Sometimes things like cisterns are built into these, or storage for some other kind of thing. I'm not sure why it's gated, because there doesn't seem to be anything in there. But each of the arches and doors all seem to be rebuilt and reconstructed in super odd ways, like ways that don't make sense, like they do in the Reef. Like you can see how the archways were filled up to leave windows and doors. So I really have no hypotheses for those. I wish I could get in there. It's dark, it's dank, it's exciting, but not today, obviously. So we're going to take another spin around the corner here and look at this beautiful site. Think about the Jungle Book. Remember all the people who worked on all of this rammed earth, and jump to the other side of the bastions. So as you can see, we've leapt over here. Another example of what I consider one of these sort of office settings. This one, to my mind, again, more modernized because it has more windows and less loopholes. I don't really know what that means, just to my simple mind, that's really what it's all about. But you can sort of go in and peek inside, although I wasn't brave enough to go really digging around in there. I think the bars over the windows and things like that mean that it has been used as storage up until now. And what's interesting, I love this door in front of us, like it gives you a good sense of the period, but I wasn't brave enough to go any further than that right there. What can you do? So last but not least, before we really get on with our speed run, is this Napoleonic era barracks. So this is outside the Fort Carre, the main square, but inside the bastions, and is just sort of sitting here, plopped down, unlike any of the other brickworks. It's beautifully redone, and inside is a fantastic museum featuring a timeline. So let's take a look and walk through that timeline, shall we? You can see there's a lot of sort of modernish equipment and gunnery inside, as well as a lovely view of all of the people and militaries and powers, so to speak, that were interested in Gdansk, in this site, and really tried to make it theirs over the years. And so this is just a great way to finish things up. If you're here, you can really enjoy a lot of the site. It's super beautiful, super well constructed, and a lot of fun to just go see. Take a look at this resiliency, and let's go do the speed run.